Amen. I want to try this again here. Let's see what we got. Okay. So how's everybody doing? Are we ready for this?
Yep. Oh,
As ready as we'll ever be, I think. Um, this is coming into kind of an interesting section of Isaiah. It's going to bounce back and forth between wrapping up the judgment of the nations to the judgment of the world to pockets of praise and looking forward to good things. We've looked in the past at the judgment of Babylon, this this major city in this area here, and Babylon was a worldly city, and it was filled with idols and false gods and false religion. So, of course, God is going to judge that. Now we're going to be looking at this judgment, this prophecy against these two cities, Tyre and Sidon. They're located right about here, actually right up here, north of the northern kingdom. They're along the coast. These two cities, Tyre especially, is a very prosperous port. There's a lot of commerce that flows in and out of there. Italy is over in here, Spain is way over here. You come around the island of Cyprus here, and this whole region funneled a lot of sea traffic to Tyre. It also came up from Egypt. A lot of the harvest from the Nile area came up here. So they were kind of one of the major port cities. With me so far? Okay, I'm going to take the map down so I can see your beautiful faces. Helen's here. Look at
yeah.
that.
It takes me a while.
Takes us all
We,
a while.
we,
So
we were
who
praying
would
for
like?
your good. We were praying for your good health, Helen, and here you appeared.
Here
Oh,
she is.
I'm very healthy. My ankle is doing so much better. I'm still with a walker, but I can get around and I can drive.
That is fantastic.
So
That is fantastic. Who would like to read in chapter 23, verses 1 through 5 for me? Susan, hand goes right up.
Get it over with quickly. The oracle concerning Tyre, wail, O ships of Tarshish, for Tyre is laid waste without house or haven. From the land of Cyprus it is revealed to them. Be still, O inhabitants of the coast, O merchants of Sidon. Your messengers passed over the sea and were on many waters. Your revenue was the grain of Shihor, the harvest of the Nile. You were the merchant of the nations. Be ashamed, O Sidon, for the sea has spoken. The stronghold of the sea, saying, I have neither travailed nor given birth. I have neither reared young men nor brought up virgins. When the report comes to Egypt, they will be in anguish over the report about Tyre.
Thanks. Isaiah is giving this warning that Tyre is going to be destroyed. But it's not just going to affect them. It's going to affect merchants and trading partners all around the Mediterranean. And it's going to happen quickly. They're going to have ships coming from Tarshish, which is southern Spain. You're going to have ships coming from there. They're coming through the Mediterranean, like I showed, coming around Cyprus. And they're going to get word that their destination of Tyre has been destroyed. What are they supposed to do? That's their livelihood as well. They're trading in the grain coming up from Egypt. It's going to be their livelihood as well. And I find this is actually really fascinating timing with all of the stuff that's going on with us and trade wars and tariffs and all of that, that it doesn't just affect one country or one company or one industry. It affects everybody. It's that domino effect that happens when one trading partner falters and stumbles. It doesn't just affect them, it affects all of these other people around them. So that's the backdrop of all of this. Who would like to read verse 6 through 14 for me? Go for it, Helen.
Cross over to Tarshish, wail, O inhabitants of the coast. Is this your exultant city, whose origins is from days of old, whose feet carried her to settle far away? Who has planned this against Tyre, the bestower of crowns, whose merchants were princes, whose traders were the honored of the earth? The Lord of hosts has planned it to defile the pride of all glory, to shame all the honored of the earth. Cross over to your own land, O ships of Tarshish. This is a harbor no more. He has stretched out his hand over the sea, and he has taken the kingdom. The Lord has given the command concerning Canaan to destroy its fortresses. He said, you will exalt no longer, O oppressed virgin daughter Sidon. Rise, cross over to Cyprus. Even there you will have no rest. Look at the land of the Chaldeans. This is the people. It was not Assyria. They had destined Tyre for wild animals. They erected their siege towers, and they tore down her palaces, and they made her a ruin. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for your fortresses are destroyed.
Thanks. There's a couple of little sections in here that I think are absolutely fascinating because they find a parallel in our more modern history. Tyre, the bestower of crowns, whose merchants are princes and whose traders are renowned in the earth. The bestowers of crowns, it's basically, they were an imperialistic city, kind of like Great Britain was, where you had all of these different countries that were separate entities, but yet were under the crown of the queen. That was Tarshish. That was Tyre. They had all of these different satellite cities and regions that they had founded, but they all paid homage back to the city. So again, it's this spider web of connections. So when Tyre falls, it's not only going to affect their trading partners around the Mediterranean, it's going to affect all of these other cities as well, because their source of revenue and income is now being cut off. The other part that's fascinating is who is behind it all? God. In verse 9, the Lord Almighty planned it to bring low the pride of all glory and to humble all those who are renowned on the earth. We see that theme repeated over and over and over in this first part of Isaiah. To humble the proud. Sometimes people just get too big for their britches. And sometimes God will let it go for a while. That is one of the sins that God seems to judge harshly in Scripture. Pride, arrogance. No, that was Satan's pride, or Satan's downfall was the pride. He wanted to be like God. He wanted to be God. And he got the boot. And time again in Scripture and in history, we see God humbles the proud, because really what they're doing in essence is saying, we don't need God. Look at me. I'm great. I'm wonderful. I take all of the credit. It's not that God is blessing me. No, it's me. It's my own effort, my own intelligence. And sooner or later, God is going to say, okay, I'm going to chop you down a few pegs here and, let you realize that you're not all that great. That has an impact not just on the person or the entity being judged, but on so many others. We don't live life in a vacuum. We don't. And so what happens to individuals and cities and nations affects so many others. God has a way of getting his point across. And we're really going to see that here in this final little section. I think this is one of the more fascinating descriptions of what happens to the city of Tyre. Who would like to read 15 through the end of the chapter for me? 15 through 18. Go for it, Marilyn.
Now it will come about in that day that Tyre will be forgotten for 70 years, like the days of one king. At the end of 70 years, it will happen to Tyre as in the song of the harlot. Take your harp, walk about the city, O forgotten harlot. Pluck the strings skillfully, sing many songs, that you may be remembered. And it will come about at the end of 70 years that the Lord will visit Tyre. Then she will go back to her harlot's wages and will play the harlot with all the kingdoms on the face of the earth. And her gain and her harlot's wages will be set apart to the Lord. It will not be stored up or hoarded, but her gain will become sufficient food and choice attire for those who dwell in the presence of the Lord.
Thanks. There's a couple of interesting things about this section. First of all of the parts before it, all of these judgments are written in poetry form. Isaiah is a marvelous poet. But when it comes to this section, it's written in prose. And there's a reason for that. In Hebrew poetry, if you really want to emphasize the point being made in the last half of the poem, you follow it up with a narrative section, a section of prose. So what this section is doing, 15 through the end of the chapter, is really putting a big, huge exclamation point, maybe 2 or 3 of them, at the end of that poetic section. So in the poetic section, we see that Tyre is going to be judged. Exclamation point. And here we're seeing it in its limitations. It's not going to be forever. The city is not going to be forgotten forever, but for 70 years. But then this description of the harlot or the prostitute, because that's really what the city was. It was an economic prostitute, harlot, plying her trade all around. And we go to this little snippet of a song that depicts this old decrepit harlot or old decrepit prostitute who no longer has men coming to her. Now she has to wander around the city playing her harp and singing and hoping that somebody will hear and be attracted to her. That's what's happening for the 70 years of Tyre's desolation. Hoping that somebody is going to remember and notice that the city used to be something. I love that image. That's desperate. Yes, Helen?
Yeah, don't you think that also she has to go around the city playing her harp, in other words, to get her cities back, her satellites back, and the trade back, because for 70 years she was nothing.
She was nothing.
She's got to build herself up again.
She's got to show she's still got it.
Yeah.
And what about this gain and harlot's wages set apart to the Lord. What's that talking about?
That to me is the really neat part about all of this. Before the destruction, Tyre was very greedy. They were making a ton of money and they were hoarding it for themselves. And now, when they are brought back, they're restored. That money is no longer going to be going internally. It's going to be going off as a tribute. And it's going to be going off to the temple to care for God's servants there. Quite a switch. Quite a switch. Susan, yes.
I have a footnote on mine that says that's about verses 15 through 18. And it says very late edition, perhaps 3rd century. And that says compare the restoration and the late oracles in Jeremiah. Blah, blah, blah. So it sounds like they're saying it was written in a different time.
That's one of the criticisms of Isaiah. And that's one of the reasons why people think there were two different authors. I don't really subscribe to that because there's other, I guess, sources that say this was part of the original text. The best thing that we can really glean from it is that it was discovered later, that it was part of the original that had gotten lost and was discovered later. That's my take on it. Take it for what it's worth. I just love the imagery of it. Is that here we've got this city that has fallen or been cut down, who now comes back and is doing the same thing, only with a different motive. And Susan, to your point, that's one of the things that people have against a lot of Isaiah is they don't believe that he could have foreseen that. They don't believe that, well, really what they're saying is that we don't believe in prophetic imagery. We don't believe that God can tell somebody that this is going to happen. Because a lot of what Isaiah talks about does take place, but it's way after his life is over. And so some of the more modern scholars say, well, that just doesn't happen. That God doesn't work that way. Yeah, I kind of think he does, but that's just me.
Basil?
Yes.
I'm gonna pivot a little bit back. What is the relationship between Tarshish and Tyre? Has Tarshish done anything wrong, or is it just part of Tyre's sins and arrogance and that kind of thing?
Tarshish is a region in southern Spain that they're kind of the hub of stuff that's coming down from Spain and Portugal and Europe and that whole area there. It's a seaport. And so their ships are the ones bringing the goods from that part of the Mediterranean into Tyre. It's kind of like Minneapolis and St. Paul, a rail hub. And we send goods all over the place, and we send them down the river, and we send them off to different places. That's what Tarshish was. It was like a trade hub. And so their ships would be then sailing through the Mediterranean to go all the way to Tarshish. That's their relationship. Tarshish isn't getting judged, but they're feeling the effects of the judgment on Tyre.
Oh, that's why they're Whale Tarshish, daughters of
Yep,
Tarshish.
that's why they wail, because
Okay.
their their source of revenue as well has been cut off.
Okay.
And it's, to me, it's just that widespread impact of what happens. From that narrower point of view, Isaiah now shifts and gets a broader vision. And you'll see it in this section. It's very similar to what we saw when we were looking at Revelation. This greater judgment, this greater destruction. So who would like to read in chapter 24? Let's go 1 through 13, little bigger chunk. Vita, go for it.
Behold, the Lord will lay waste the earth and make behold, the Lord will lay waste the earth and make it desolate, and he will twist its surface and scatter its inhabitants. And it shall be as with the people, so with the priest, as with the slave, so with his master, as with the maid, so with her mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the creditor, so with the debtor. The earth shall be utterly laid waste and utterly despoiled, for the Lord has spoken this word.
Let's stop
The
right
earth,
there. Let's stop there and just we'll pause. You can come back and continue, but I just want to emphasize what's going on here. Isaiah is seeing this vision, this image. God is speaking to him about a time when, first of all, everybody is going to become equal. Everybody is going to feel the same effects. The priest will have the same effect as the people, the master, the same effect as the servant, the mistress for the maid, the buyer, the seller. Your status in life isn't going to mean anything. The rich and the poor, the powerful and the lowly will all feel the impact of this judgment. It's really sad when we talk about that. We want this equality and this equity. And in life, it's really hard to attain. It's sad that in judgment, that's where it comes about. You're not going to escape God's judgment just because you have power and prestige or money. It's going to impact you the same as everybody else. That's going to be hard. That's going to be hard. Okay, continue. Thank you for.
sure. How far did you want me to go again?
Through 13.
Okay. Sounds good. The earth mourns and withers, the world languishes and withers, the heavens languish together with the earth. The earth lies polluted under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed the laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore, a curse devours the earth, and its inhabitants suffer for their guilt. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are scorched, and few men are left. The wine mourns, the vine languishes, all the merry-hearted sigh. The mirth of the timbrels is stilled, the noise of the jubilant has ceased, the mirth of the lyre is stilled. No more do they drink wine with singing, strong drink is bitter to those who drink it. The city of chaos is broken down, every house is shut up so that none can enter. There is an outcry in the streets for lack of wine, all joy has reached its eventide. The gladness of the earth is banished, desolation is left in the city. For thus it shall be in the midst of the earth among the nations, as when an olive tree is beaten, as at the gleaning when the vintage is done.
Thank you. Powerful image here. the earth is defiled. Creation is defiled by the people. And it has an impact on both the people and creation itself. You know, think back to Sunday school days when you go back to Genesis and the fall and, leave the garden, and the earth itself is cursed. No longer is it this idyllic experience of living in paradise where you didn't have to work for anything. Suddenly now there's thorns and drought and all of those things that you didn't have to deal with. Well, this is repeating that cycle. And it's talking about the inhabitants will be scorched and burned. Back in Genesis, when God brought that judgment on the world, he brought it through water and a flood. And he said he will no longer do that. But instead, when God is going to bring judgment, it's going to be through scorching and fire. Now, yes, Susan. Oh, you're muted. There we go.
Yeah. When she read this passage, it made me think about PFAS.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. And I was thinking of climate change too, but
Yep.
we're wrecking the planet.
We're wrecking the planet and we're suffering for it.
Yep.
We will suffer greatly in the future.
Yeah.
Yes.
It'll get worse.
Yes.
It's amazing how when we can step back and look at the bigger picture, you see a lot of these puzzle pieces that are starting to fall into place. Now, I'm not going to stand here or sit here and say that the world is ending tomorrow. I don't know. It might, it might not. It might go on for another 1,000 years. Who knows? But what we're seeing is all of these little pieces coming into the picture. And one of these days, there's going to be that final puzzle piece, and then here it is, the end. But until that, I encourage you not to get so wrapped up in the details of the bad stuff, because that's really easy to do, and especially in light of this or the PFAS or the fires or climate change. All of those things are easy to get wrapped up in. And what that does is it distracts us from the bigger picture. It's in the midst of all of that that God calls us to be the light. Not always the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, but to be the light that shines in the darkness. Some are called to rail against what's happening, and some are called to simply be that light. It's easy to sit and whine. It's harder to be a light that shines in the midst of all of that. And that's really our challenge as Christians. It's real easy to point fingers and blame everybody else. It's harder to be a voice of love and compassion and reason. It's harder to be a light that shines in the midst of the mess that we create as human beings. I cannot stop climate change by myself. None of us can.
Yeah.
We can do our part, but don't get distracted by that. Yes, Vita.
You know where I see the lights that you're talking about? Almost every disaster, war, whatever, calamity happens, there are so many stories of individuals on a one-on-one basis who are helping the people around them.
Yep.
I think of that awesome man, Jose Andres, who should be beatified. He's founded World Central Kitchen, and wherever there's a disaster or a war or anything, he networks with chefs and restaurateurs on the ground in that area, and he's got hot meals within hours for people.
Yep.
You know, he to me, he is an example of that. And it's not political, it's not pointing fingers. He's just helping people who are hungry. And it just so and I think of the people helping hurricane survivors pick up the debris from their homes, you know, or find photos of their families,
Yeah.
you know, that got blown by the wind. So that's the kind of stuff that keeps me going, you know,
Or
like you
even on
say,
a more
to
local level, a
yeah,
box out in the Narthex of filling it with hats and mittens.
yep,
You know,
ICA
providing,
donations. Yeah.
yeah, it's those
Yeah.
little things. We're living in a tough economy.
Mhm.
And the more we can do to help others, they're never going to know where it comes from. That's not the point. I don't do loaves and fishes so people look at me and say, oh, how wonderful you are. You're feeding hungry people. That's not why I'm doing it. I do it because we're feeding hungry people. And it should be the same with everything that we do. It's not about pointing our fingers at us and say, look at us, look how beautiful we are and how wonderful we are, because that's that pride thing that God is eventually going to knock down. It's about simply seeing the need of the world or our neighbors and doing whatever we can do to bring something into it, not for our glory, but for the glory of God. Because as we saw in Revelation and as we're going to see here, things are hard and they're going to get harder. There's no two ways about it. And it's in the midst of that God uses people to bring about comfort, hope. I'm going to get off that soapbox now because I could go for hours on that. Who would like to read 14 through 16 for me? Just a little short chunk here. Catherine, go for it.
Okay, 14. They raise their voices, they shout for joy. From the west, they acclaim the Lord's majesty. Therefore, in the east, give glory to the Lord. Exalt the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. In the islands of the sea. From the ends of the earth, we hear singing, glory to the righteous one. But I said, I waste away, woe is me. The treacherous betray. With treachery, the treacherous betray.
Thanks. This is an interesting little dichotomy here. In the midst of all of this destruction and things, there are going to be people who will see God's hand in it and shout for joy because they have trust not in the systems and in the economies, they have trust in God. And they see this as part of his bigger picture, his bigger plan. And so they are going to be rejoicing. But then on the other hand, you're going to see those who are deceitful, treacherous, betraying. It's really this tussle between good and evil. And that's how Isaiah is choosing to bring that about, talking about those who are praising God in the midst of this and those who are still trying to scheme and plot and wind their way through it on their own accord. The question is, what side are we going to fall on? those are not easy questions. What side are we going to fall on? When I was a youth pastor, we used to get into these really deep discussions. And it was all designed to get us all to think a little bit more. And one of the questions I would pose every once in a while to new kids or new group would be, if it were illegal tomorrow to be a Christian, what would you do? If it were suddenly illegal to be a Christian, what would you do?
Go underground.
That's my thought
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
It's easy to sit in our comfort and say, oh, I'd stand firm. But think about all those places in the world that it is illegal. Yes, Susan.
Well, not necessarily just to be a Christian, but to be a particular brand of Christian, because I've got into family history and I, have ancestors who were murdered in France because they were Protestants.
Yep.
And then a whole branch of them escaped and ended up in America. But all these religious wars, even
Yeah.
within Christianity.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd be brave enough. Oh. Am I on or not?
You are.
You're on.
I don't think I'd be brave enough to just say I'm a Christian and go to my death, or go to jail or whatever. I mean, look what happened in Hitler's country. At that time, people died for it, or those that spoke out against it. I would hope I would practice my Christian kindnesses, beliefs, whatever. Try to live a Christian life, but I'd be quiet about it, I guess.
Yeah. When we're reading that,
Marilyn.
I was thinking about, we were recently in DC and went to the African American Museum where they had like this interactive thing where you could answer questions about, like, choose your thing. Were you going to be like a freedom rider in the 60s, or were you going to sit at the lunch counter? And questions like, okay, you're being arrested at the lunch counter, you're thrown into jail, you're white, your compatriots are black, they're being held, and you have the opportunity to get out. What would you do? And it's like, well, I'd like to think I'd stay there with them, but I'm a chicken liver. I mean, I might go in and not, like, wish I could, but not be strong enough to do that. So it's interesting questions. I mean, the same thing about, yeah, what would you do? How far would you go? And maybe you don't know until that very moment that you would be strong enough to do that, to take whatever came. Interesting questions.
I think it all depends too on what leads up to it, and if your back gets pushed against the wall, so to speak, you might go that far. I don't know what kind of okay, say we're trained in hand-to-hand combat or something like that. I'd be far more likely to get physical with somebody if I'm protecting someone I love or a child. So there's a lot of circumstantial stuff too, but that's a really interesting question, Basil. I'm with the other ladies. I would like to think that I don't think I would ever repudiate my beliefs, but I think I would start quietly and then see if I get pushed to do more.
Yeah, Catherine.
Reminds me of Revelation, where you get to the point where you have to bow down to the beast or you're dead. And I have thought about that, and I thought, well, it's kind of the end of the world. I would die, go to heaven.
Yeah. At that point,
come and get me, Jesus.
Yes.
We've had these periods throughout history. You think of the Inquisition, you think back into even the persecutions of the Christians in Rome. Here's your choice. You either
The
worship
persecution
Caesar.
of the Christians in England.
Yep.
Oh,
Get
sure.
in line and go be lion food, But the thing is, then people were willing to go get in line and be eaten by a lion. It became just a powerful testimony to their faith. And I hope and pray that if that ever happens, that not on my strength, because I'm the chicken, but like Stephen, when he was going to be stoned for his faith, that he just simply looked up and saw Jesus, and the Spirit came over him and gave him great peace and strength to meet that death with joy. That would be my hope and prayer.
Yeah.
Don't know if I'm going to have to ever be in that position, but it doesn't hurt to think about it. It's one of those great barometers of what level is my faith at? That if somebody knocked on my door right now, what would my response be? Because in all reality, every single day we should be ready to give that level of testimony in our faith. Because we never know. We never know who is going to be watching and listening. And always be ready to give an account for the hope that you have in Jesus. Okay. We may get through 24. Yeah, we should. Who would like to read verse 17 through 23 for me, please? Go for it, Susan.
Terror and the pit and the snare are upon you, O inhabitant of the earth. He who flees at the sound of the terror shall fall into the pit, and he who climbs out of the pit shall be caught in the snare. For the windows of heaven are opened, and the foundations of the earth tremble. The earth is utterly broken, the earth is rent asunder, the earth is violently shaken. The earth staggers like a drunken man, it sways like a hut, its transgression lies heavily upon it, and it falls and will not rise again. Do you want me to keep on going?
Yes, please, to the end of the chapter.
On that day, the Lord will punish the host of heaven, in heaven and the kings in heaven. Let me start that one over again. On that day, the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven and the kings of the earth on the earth. They will be gathered together as prisoners in a pit. They will be shut up in a prison, and after many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be confounded and the sun ashamed. For the Lord of hosts will reign on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and before his elders he will manifest his glory.
Thanks. Not a pretty picture. Yeah, Helen.
Yeah, what is the host of heaven that is going to be punished? Who is the host of heaven? Is that all the people that have died?
No. Another way that that's translated is the powers in heaven above. Think to Paul talking about the powers of this earth. It's really Satan in the demonic realm.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So Satan and evil and the demons are going to be judged the same as the kings and the people of this earth. And we saw that again in Revelation, that there's no escaping. Everybody is going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ, including evil. And so what Isaiah is seeing here is that at this time, at this place of that final judgment, there's no escaping. You try to run away and you're going to fall into a pit. You climb out of the pit, you're going to get caught in a snare. There's no escaping when God is bringing this final judgment. He's going to judge the heavens and the earth, good and evil. It's all going to come to an end. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah. That's this culmination of this judgment, is that we've seen it starts with all of the nations around Israel, that all of the people are going to be judged. We're going to see in a little bit that he's also going to talk about judging his own people. But right now he's wrapping up judging all of the other nations, bringing it to this final fruition that we saw in Revelation, where the entirety of earth is going to be judged, including creation itself. We're going to see the foundations of the earth shake. The earth is broken, split asunder. The earth is totally shaken. I get these visions of earthquakes and volcanoes and everything just going crazy. I like Paul's description in Corinthians about all creation is groaning in anticipation for Christ to return. And he uses that image of childbirth, a woman groaning as in childbirth. You know, the pains start out a little bit, then you wait a while, and then you go again and going again and going again. And eventually, as you're leading up to birth, they get sharper and sharper and closer together. And that's that image that Paul is giving of the entirety of creation waiting for Christ to be revealed again. Sometimes we think that we are above creation. Sometimes we think that there's two separate things that God deals with. He deals with us, human beings, and he deals with the rocks and the trees and the turtles and the mourning doves differently. We're all in this mess together. And as Isaiah was saying, it's because of our messing up that creation suffers. But creation itself doesn't get a free pass as well. They're part of this mess. If it only stopped there, this would be pretty ugly. If that's where the story ended, there would be no hope. But even here, Isaiah now is shifting gears. I don't want to get too deep into this next section, but I just want to read just a couple of verses. O Lord, you are my God, and I will exalt and praise your name. For in perfect faithfulness you have done marvelous things, things you planned long ago. You have made the city a heap of rubble, fortified town a ruin, foreigners' stronghold, a city no more. It will never be rebuilt. Therefore, strong people will honor you. Cities of ruthless nations will revere you. You have been a refuge for the poor, a refuge for the needy in his distress, a shelter from the storm, a shade from the heat. For the breath of the ruthless is like a storm driving against a wall, and like the heat of the desert. You silence the uproar of foreigners as heat is reduced by shadow of a cloud. So the song of the ruthless is stilled. All of this, Isaiah is basically saying, Lord, your power on display is glorious. You stood up to the evil. You've become hope for the hopeless, shade for the weary. In the midst of this message of destruction, there's this glimmer of hope that Isaiah is bringing forth. And as we go into the next section, it's going to get clearer and clearer and clearer that this hope is found on Zion, in Christ. It's going to be another one of these glimpses that we have into Jesus. But I'm going to stop it here. We'll probably go back and reread that again next week, but I didn't want to leave us on a downer.
Basil,
Wanted to be able to see.
were you in church on Sunday?
No, we were at Hope
Yes,
Springs.
Okay. We did everything that Jesus is the light. Everything was light. All the songs we sang, everything.
Oh,
And we went out singing, "Walk in the light, Jesus the light." And it was so uplifting and wonderful. And it was just, Jesus is the light. And first time they've ever done this, everybody, they had little glass things with candles. So everybody got a candle when they went in. And they took a candle home. It was great.
that is cool. I'm going to have to go back and watch that. Haven't had
Yeah,
a
it
chance
was-
to see that yet.
Yeah. Roger he comes up, the words that of the songs that he has us sing are so
Yeah.
there. It was
Yeah.
just, and it was just a really
The whole
upbeat.
service was based on the Song of Simeon,
Yeah.
and which we say every night.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Guy talked about that in his sermon.
Yeah.
One of the really nice things in our choir practices is Roger will give us the background of he always knows where the tune comes from, the words, he just calls it to our attention, or he knows the composer, I mean, we get some background, but then we also get his thought process on why he selected something. The offertory we did was very sort of it was kind of Orthodox chant like, but it was, the whole "I'm the servant,"
Yeah.
Isaiah, nunc dimittis. It wasn't in Latin, but nunc dimittis, and just it
I
was a
hope
really
you
nice.
people realize the true gift that he is.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh yeah, big time,
And he had,
100%.
He
and
is
he had good news too.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a gift.
he truly is. He truly is.
I think
Well,
some
thank
of us
you,
who,
everybody.
some people who may not realize how gifted he is, but it starts to seep into your head. Even if you're not really that attentive, it's like something's going on here
Yep.
that this man is bringing to our worship and our liturgy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks, Basil.
Definitely a light.
Yeah.
Thank you, Basil.
Take care, folks.
Thank you.
I will be in church on Sunday, so I will see you then.
All right.
Okay.
All right.